Hare Krishna, everyone. We'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 19, verse 13 today. Again, my name is Akhanda Das, and we'll spend some time reading that verse and discussing some concepts from there. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. SP 1.19.13. Rajo Vacha Ho Vayam Dhan Yatma Nipranam Mahatmanurgrahaniya Shila Rajnam Kulam Brahmana Pada Sochad Durad Vishtam Bata Garya Karma. The word for word, I'll read. Raja Vacha, the fortunate king said, Aho, Vayam, we, Dhanyatama, most thankful, Nirpanam, of all the kings, Mahatama, of the great souls, Anugrahaniya Shila, trained to get favors, Rajam, of the royal, Kulam, orders, Brahmana Pada, feet of the Brahmanas, Sochat, refuse after cleaning, Durat, at a distance, Vishvashtam, always left out, Pata, on account of, Garya, condemnable, karma, activities. Translation. The fortunate king said, indeed, we are the most grateful of all the kings who are trained to get favors from the great souls. Generally, you sages consider royalty as refuse to be rejected and left in a distant place. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to religious principles, stool, urine, wash water, etc., must be left at a long distance. Attached bathrooms, urinals, etc., may be very convenient amenities of modern civilization, but they're ordered to be situated at a distance from residential quarters. That very example is cited here in relation to the kingly order for those who are progressively marching back to Godhead. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that to be in intimate touch with dollars and cents men, or the kingly order, is worse than suicide for one who desires to go back to Godhead. In other words, the transcendentalists do not generally associate with men who are too enamored by the external beauty of God's creation. By advanced knowledge and spiritual realization, the transcendentalist knows that this beautiful material world is nothing but a shadowy reflection of the reality, the kingdom of God. They are not, therefore, very much captivated by royal opulence or anything like that. But in the case of Maharaj Parikshit, the situation was very different. Apparently, the king was condemned to death by an inexperienced Brahmana boy, but factually, he was called by the Lord to return to him. Other transcendentalists, the great sages and mystics who assembled together because of Maharaj Parikshit's fasting unto death, were quite anxious to see him, for he was going back to Godhead. Maharaj Parikshit could also understand that the great sages who assembled there were all kind to his forefathers, the Pandavas, because of their devotional service to the Lord. He therefore felt grateful to the sages for being present there at the last stage of his life, and he felt that it was all due to the greatness of his late forefathers or grandfathers. He felt proud, therefore, that he happened to be the descendant of such great devotees. Such pride for the devotees of the Lord is certainly not equal to the puffed up sense of vanity from material prosperity. The first is reality, whereas the other is false and vain. So again, this is Canto 1, chapter 19, verse 13. So just to again set up some context here, Parikshit Maharaj in this chapter has put that serpent or snake around the sage, and he feels really bad about what he did, to that Brahmana. He feels very regretful of what he had done. And on his way back, he almost wishes that some kind of calamity takes on him, or so he can immediately atone for what he had done. In fact, he wishes that all his wealth would just burn up. So he's immediately recognized what act he's committed, and he just wants to atone for it as soon as possible. But just then he receives this news that he will die in 7 days of a snake bite. And so actually he's somewhat relieved to hear that, okay, I will be atoning for what I've done. That's his reaction, his immediate reaction. And so with that in mind, he immediately decides to focus his mind on Krishna at the banks of Ganga. And so at this time, when he's about to do this, all the sages from across the world, Atri, and there's a whole list of names it gives, they all show up on the scene when he's about to do that. And so in response to that, in this verse, he's saying, I'm so lucky and grateful that all these sages are showing up. Generally, sages want to stay as far away as they can from kings and royalty. And so he's grateful and amazed that they're all showing up at this time, when considering he's a king. That's the crux of this verse, and he's feeling gratitude and just being grateful for them to come there. In the purport, Prabhupada talks about the custom where generally sages don't associate with such materialistic men, but they had come to interact with Parikshit Maharaj. And in the purport, Prabhupada talks about a couple of reasons why actually the sages had showed up. It wasn't entirely just because of Parikshit Maharaj. The situation was such that they felt it was the right time to come. Prabhupada compares, he talks about this, where in the culture of India, people stay away from toilets. In fact, I think I heard some crazy statistic where it's like 50% or 40% of homes in India still don't have bathrooms in their homes. Like they have to use a public bathroom to go and use it. And it's not just because of infrastructure and poverty restrictions. It's apparently part of the culture, especially in the local villages, that you don't have a toilet in your house. It's considered contaminated and really bad to have in one's home. And so the toilets are actually at a distance away, and apparently people go as a group in the morning or whatever time might be to sort of do their business. And so Prabhupada is talking about that culture, that just like that, people stay away from kings and royalty. Lord Chaitanya specifically is emphatic in his Leela, where he says not to associate with materialistic men. I think he says he compares it to saying that associating with materialistic people is worse than even suicide. And so again, Parikshit Maharaj is feeling grateful for a few reasons. One is because they've showed up, but also because the sages have been providing their counsel and advice for many years to his fathers and his forefathers. And so he's grateful for that act for them to do that. Also, the sages knew that that Parikshit Maharaj was being called back to Godhead. The Brahmana, putting that curse was really an instrument in all this, but the purpose was for him, Parikshit Maharaj to go back to Godhead. That was sort of the real reason. And so in the purport, Prabhupada says, he doesn't take that pride upon himself. He's passing that. He's grateful to his forefathers. He's thinking not because of me, but because of what my previous generation had done. This is why the sages have shown up. And so he's sort of making sure to be very clear about that. And that's how he's extending his gratitude to the sages. I thought we could discuss the King Prataparudra pastime in relation to his interaction with Lord Chaitanya, as it sort of matches the situation in one way, where King Prataparudra, who was a king, really wanted to meet Lord Chaitanya, but Lord Chaitanya refused multiple times to meet him because he was a king, because he was royalty. He didn't want to associate himself with a king. And there's a couple lessons and themes that come out of that pastime that I thought were relatable and something we could take away with, we could walk away with. So I'll just sort of quickly describe that pastime and sort of share some of the learnings that I thought were important in relation to this. So King Prataparudra, was an ardent devotee. He was a king. He was a strong supporter of knowledge, Vaishnavism, Vedic wisdom. So he wasn't just merely a materialistic king. He in fact invited Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to become the key priest in his kingdom and to help guide him. And the king by nature was a very humble and powerful king. And he was residing in the area of Puri, Jagannath Puri. Lord Chaitanya had arrived to Jagannath Puri at the request of his mother. He arrived to Puri at that time. And when he came to Puri, he stayed at Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's home for almost 3 or 4 months, some long length of time. He stayed in his house. And then he would be in and out. Mahaprabhu would be in and out in Puri, but at one point he'd gone on a tour to South India where he got into a very intimate association of Ramananda Roy, and Lord Chaitanya in fact asked Ramananda Roy to come to Puri and reside there. King Prataparudra, of course, heard about Lord Chaitanya, that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he requested, King Prataparudra requested Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to somehow arrange a meeting of King Prataparudra and Lord Chaitanya. He said he requested, please, I want to get his mercy. He's such a great personality. And so Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya took that request and asked Lord Chaitanya if he could make that happen. Could he allow King Prataparudra to meet Lord Chaitanya? And immediately when Lord Chaitanya heard this, he closed his ears and he said, why are you asking such an undesirable thing from me? You're asking me to meet a king. Royalty, that is the that is the worst sort of person to associate with. There's no way I will even consider doing that. And again, this is just part of the culture and part of Vedic religion. And then so Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya asked Lord Chaitanya to reconsider, since King Prataparudra was such a great devotee. But Lord Chaitanya kept refusing, and at one point just silenced Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and said, "This is just not going to happen." And so, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya informed that to King Prataparudra and said, told him, "I'll keep thinking of what we can do here, but for now, this won't happen." Meanwhile, Ramananda Roy had arrived to Puri, and he was actually serving. Ramananda Roy was serving in King Prataparudra's kingdom, in his court. And Ramananda Roy asked King Prataparudra to relieve him of his duties, so Ramananda Roy could only serve Lord Chaitanya. And so when King Prataparudra heard that, he said, of course, immediately, he heard, "You want to serve Lord Chaitanya? Yeah, no, you don't have to do anything here. In fact, you'll get paid your salary without your work, because you want to worship Lord Chaitanya. That makes complete sense." And in fact, that was the first interaction Ramananda Roy had with King Prataparudra. That was the first interaction where he requested to be relieved of his duties, and King Prataparudra immediately agreed. And King Prataparudra in fact told Ramananda Roy, I hope someday I get to meet Lord Chaitanya myself. I really have this strong desire to make that happen. And so, without King Prataparudra telling Ramananda Roy specifically to do anything, Ramananda Roy told all this to Lord Chaitanya. He said, "Hey, King Prataparudra immediately relieved me of my duties," and he didn't even, Ramananda Roy didn't tell Lord Chaitanya that King Prataparudra wants to meet him really bad. All Ramananda Roy told Lord Chaitanya was this ecstatic reaction that King Prataparudra had. And Lord Chaitanya was pleased by someone like Ramananda Roy liking King Prataparudra so much. And there was a specific teaching that Lord Chaitanya was demonstrating here, which is, when you get the mercy of the Lord's devotees, then that's a huge step in approaching towards Krishna. Being at the object or in the favor of Lord Chaitanya's devotees, by getting their goodwill, their mercy, all good fortune will come. And in fact, Lord Chaitanya had become, softer in his regard for meeting a king, or if you were to ever converse with Sarvabhauma in the future, he'd become just softer in general, because he'd seen that someone like Ramananda Roy had such high regard for King Prataparudra. And King Prataparudra kept following up with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Has Lord Chaitanya's mind changed? Is he willing to meet me now? And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya would say, no, he still doesn't want to meet a king. This just doesn't seem like it's gonna happen. And King Prataparudra would say, Lord Chaitanya has delivered the lowest of people like Jagai and Madai. He bestows his mercy on all kinds of people. But he's not giving me his mercy. My life is useless if it keeps going on like this. And also what Bhattacharya can say is, someday I hope we can make this happen. One day, King Prataparudra sees Lord Chaitanya and his group of devotees, in this kirtan, dancing on the streets, and King Prataparudra is just enamored by seeing this wonderful mood of reciprocation of the devotees, and and Lord Chaitanya, in that kirtan. And if anything, King Prataparudra's desire to see Lord Chaitanya even grew even more after seeing that mood, after seeing how that interaction was happening. And so again, King, Prataparudra approached Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. What if all of Lord Chaitanya's devotees or all his associates make a case for Lord Chaitanya to see Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya? Then the Lord might be willing to see King Prataparudra. All these associates, what if they all make a case for him to see me? And so Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said, okay, yeah, let me try that. Let me see if I can get some people together and see if we can convince him. So all the devotees, all the associates agree and go to Lord Chaitanya and make a case for it. And in fact, Lord Nityananda makes a case for it, who's such a dear devotee or dear associate of Lord Chaitanya. And he really pleads and requests. He even says, when love is left unfulfilled, people take their lives, or give King Prataparudra something, at least maybe your external garments for now. And Lord Chaitanya was still very much, he was actually, he was very sad, unhappy and sort of, why all of you are asking me to do this? What's going on here? How can this again be even a thought? Somehow he gives his external garments and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya gives them to King Prataparudra, and King Prataparudra worships those garments of Lord Chaitanya as some way of meeting with him. In reality, during this whole time, Lord Chaitanya's heart is getting softer and softer because he's seeing his associates and devotees praise the greatness of King Prataparudra. But still, Lord Chaitanya, keeping the rules and regulations in mind, he knows that the whole world will criticize him if he interacts with the king. So Lord Chaitanya says, maybe I can meet King Prataparudra's son, because the Vedas say that the son is the representation of the father. So maybe I can meet his son. He's not exactly a king. That could be fine. That could work. And so then, the son of King Prataparudra is dressed in a very simple cowherd boy clothing, and he's introduced to Lord Chaitanya. And the son, when he meets Lord Chaitanya, is dancing and is just recharged with this ecstatic mood, right? And he's so excited to meet Lord Chaitanya, and he's getting Lord Chaitanya's association. And when the son comes back, the King Prataparudra embraces the son, and he feels the same ecstasy that the son experienced with Lord Chaitanya. And so every day, King Prataparudra's son would get association of Lord Chaitanya, or some frequency, and then the son would go back to King Prataparudra, and King Prataparudra would get some sort of sense of association of Lord Chaitanya, and he would feel very ecstatic about that. At one point of time, and this is the famous sort of painting that we've seen, King Prataparudra is sweeping the floor when the deity is coming out. When Lord Jagannath's deity comes out on Rath Yatra day or the day before, when they're bringing out Lord Jagannath outside, everyone is outside waiting, during Rath Yatra time, and that's the time had come. Rath Yatra time was coming up, and the king was sweeping the floor as the deities were coming out. And Lord Chaitanya sees that the king in a humble mood is sweeping the floor and waiting for Lord Jagannath to come out. And Lord Chaitanya is just is impressed by that quality. And somewhere in his mind, he says, maybe I will give my association to King Prataparudra. On the Rath Yatra day, Lord Chaitanya is is ecstatically dancing in kirtan with multiple devotees surrounding him in that dance. I think if you, in the description, it talks about somewhere, where Lord Chaitanya would, sort of choreograph and set up like 7 or 8 groups of kirtan with specific people in those groups, and specifically how they would, dance. And so there were 7 different groups that are of kirtan that are taking place. And King Pratap Rudra is just standing at a distance and seeing all this kirtan take place, and the deities come out. And he's just observing all this, and he notices at one point that Lord Chaitanya has made himself available to all these 7 different kirtan groups. But to the people in each of these individual groups, they think that Lord Chaitanya is with them. Lord Chaitanya is not with the rest of the other kirtan groups. The people in those kirtan groups just think that, oh, Lord Mahaprabhu is just with us. He's with me. But in reality, from King Pratap Rudra's vantage point, Mahaprabhu is actually in all these 7 different groups at the same time. And he's telling, and King Pratap Rudra is telling all this to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, that this is what I'm seeing. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, says, the fact that you can see this, you've gotten Mahaprabhu's mercy. Not everyone can see this. There's only a few associates that can even notice what's happening here, that Mahaprabhu has manifested himself in all these 7 or 8 different kirtan groups. And so Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya says, you've received his mercy. So if you want to meet him, if you want to get his darshan directly, dress very simply and go secretly meet him when Mahaprabhu becomes very tired from dancing in these 7 parties. At one point, Mahaprabhu will, get very tired and start lamenting in Radharani's mood. And at that time, when he's really tired, you can simply dress simply and go approach him and sing the sweet Gopi Gita. And so then King Pratap Rudra waits for that moment, and he waits for Mahaprabhu to, get finished with the kirtan, get tired, and where he starts lamenting in Radharani's mood. And so Mahaprabhu goes in a small garden-like area and is in that mood, and King Pratap Rudra approaches him as this very simple person. And Mahaprabhu immediately hugs him. And King Pratap Rudra is, of course, in ecstatic mood. And Mahaprabhu in that moment, because he's so ecstatic, doesn't even realize that he's the king, right? But finally, King Pratap Rudra has gotten the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya has given that mercy, and from there on, that he has it. He's finally got the association of Lord Chaitanya. And of course, Lord Chaitanya realized that this is the king ultimately. And so from there on, King Pratap Rudra has finally achieved his mission of life. Why he even wanted to continue any of his path was to get Lord Chaitanya's mercy. And so, this pastime, I thought it was interesting in the same regard where, in the case of Parikshit Maharaj, it took Parikshit Maharaj's fathers and forefathers to be such great personalities. And it took for Parikshit Maharaj to get cursed, for these sages to arrive at the scene and give their association to Parikshit Maharaj. So much again had to take place for them to get that association of these great personalities. Different situations, different things have to take place in each of these situations. But Parikshit Maharaj is extremely grateful of this happening. And you can tell the endeavors and efforts that these kings put, King Parikshit Maharaj or King Pratap Rudra put, to get that get that mercy. And so there was a couple themes or that I thought were interesting. You know, something that comes to my mind is sort of what it takes to get the Lord's mercy. Like if you notice, there was constant persistence of wanting to meet the Lord by King Pratap, where he didn't give up that first time. He kept trying, kept trying in different ways. There was constant persistence. And I feel like in Krishna consciousness, at times we have our moments where our chanting is weak or our sadhana is weak, but that persistence is important to if you really want that mercy. And again, King Pratap and Parikshit Maharaj demonstrated that persistence that they kept on showing in that time frame. The second sort of theme or lesson I thought was interesting was, and this is a teaching that Mahaprabhu was showing, is that getting the mercy of his devotees is so important. It's not enough to just chant well or to do your sadhana well, but it's getting the mercy of his devotees is so important. And so in our case, just thinking about getting the mercy of the various sannyasis or senior devotees in the movement, is important to get as we think about progressing in our Krishna consciousness. It's such a vital concept that, again, with persistence and with that desire, it can help march towards a better end state of Krishna consciousness. And the last lesson and theme that I thought was interesting was this quality of simplicity. Both kings, King Parikshit Maharaj and King Pratap, showed this humble and mood of simplicity. They immediately let go of their kingly attire or desires and dressed very simply to approach the Lord. And that, again, and that's sort of you can call that external simplicity, but even internally, they didn't care about anything else. They weren't duplicitous. They were very sort of clear in their vision and what they wanted to get, and they kept in a simple mood and humble mood, requesting the associates to help them get this mercy. And so I thought these three were sort of very important themes: the persistence, getting mercy of the Lord's devotees, and then simplicity, important factors and tools in getting the Lord's mercy. And that was well demonstrated in the lives of Parikshit Maharaj and even King Pratap. One last thing that sort of comes into mind is when the Brahmastra was coming at the womb of Uttara, and she was seeking protection to protect the womb. Before Parikshit Maharaj even taking birth, he had already been protected because of the fact that he was part of this great lineage, a lineage of devotees, and such a great family that were devotees of Krishna. And again, Parikshit Maharaj is grateful to the fact that he knows that this is one of the reasons, because of his forefathers, he was protected. And so, yeah, that aspect of gratitude is also extremely important. I'll stop here. These are the main thoughts that I wanted to cover, to see if there's any comments or discussion or questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Guru Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada. And thank you very much for that wonderful narration of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and King Pratap Rudra pastime. Thank you so much. Very wonderful talk, lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. if nothing else, we can end here and pick up tomorrow again. Okay. Hare Krishna, everyone.
So much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Very well.